I thought I would start by reading your bio, if you don't mind, because I think it's really interesting. So, and I'm a Luddite, so I printed it up. So Mary is the author of the book, obviously we know that. The World is Ours to Cherish, which is the children's book that she has there. And she's also known for her essays that dissect and interrogate the climate crisis, drawing heavily on her personal experience as a black woman with deep roots in the South. Her work has appeared in New York Magazine, The Nation, The Boston Globe, Vox, Rolling Stone, and other outlets. Her work has also been featured in collections like All We Can Save, which is a great book. Get it? This is the one I have, and I love it. The World as We Knew It, The Black Agenda, Letters to the Earth, and Not Too Late. With investigative journalist Amy Westervelt, she co-created the Hot Take podcast and newsletter, which retired in 2022. But in 2024, they launched Spill, which fosters messy conversations about the climate crisis. So if you listen to podcasts, you should listen to this podcast because it's great. I was a big fan of Hot Takes. Or Hot Take. She's taught at Columbia University in New York and Tulane University in New Orleans. And in 2020, she received a SEAL Environmental Journalism Award. Just a little bit more I want to say.
I forgot it was this long.
It's good. It's good. It's good. I wanted to read. I know I could have read the shorter one, but I wanted this one.
No, sorry.
Mary has been obsessed with the art of storytelling as long as she can remember. She began writing about the climate crisis in 2018 as a way to process her own climate grief. From there, she expanded into other modes of storytelling, including podcasting, teaching, and public speaking. She's based in New Orleans, but her heart is in Mississippi and her soul is in Birmingham.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So I wanted to read that because since we're having a conversation, we're both talking. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned storytelling in your bio because I mentioned storytelling in my bio as well. That I'm a storyteller and it's a big part of my work. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in what inspired your storytelling journey? Was it? I understand it's a way to process grief and to heal. I think we both use it in that way. But what started you on that journey? When did you start telling stories, or feel like I'm a storyteller? I need to tell these stories.
Yeah, I think I came from a family of storytellers. It's kind of what my grandfather and all of his brothers would do, all of his sisters. Like my great aunts and great uncles were very big influences on me as a child. They were my village, my childcare, my everything, and they were great storytellers. Oh my God! My grandfather, I'm proud to say, is like one of the best ones. He was hilarious. Like the way he used tone and speed and like different ways to color a story was always just really fascinating. You just like sit at his knee and you would hear the best stories ever. And so many of the stories I would hear growing up had something to do with an animal or something to do with nature in some sort of way. Like there was a time that the chicken got stuck on Aunt Jackie's head. That's the whole story, right? And everybody just like, they say that one sentence and everybody's in tears. It actually is very funny, like it wouldn't get off. And then there's a story of the time that my Uncle Gerald's dog married a duck, and like you would hear these stories over and over again. At the time Papa D barbecued Uncle Biddy's goat. And so like I think my story or my journey as a storyteller parallels my journey as an environmentalist, because the stories I heard so often were about nature and animals, because that was just such a big part of our lives and just of everything that was around us. So I think, I became a storyteller just pretty much from birth. It was how we communicated. It was how we bonded. Like there were stories that we passed down generation to generation, like medicine. It was almost like, oh, you're having a bad day? Here's this story that you've heard a million times, but will make you laugh every single time, right? And then I fell in love with literature when I was in the second grade. And I was a voracious reader as a child. I would just like tear through books, right? Like I wanted to learn to read at a very young age because all my older cousins could read. And I didn't like that they could do something I couldn't do. So I wanted to learn how to read. And so I learned how to read very quickly. And then I started tearing through children's books really fast. And then there was this day where I didn't have any children's books left in the house. I read everything. I was sick of reading all the books that I had, so I started thumbing around for a new book, and I found this book called I Am the Darker Brother, and it had an illustration on the cover, and I thought, oh, I found a new children's book. No, that was a collection of Harlem Renaissance poetry. And I started reading that, and that was the day that I left the children's section of the library and fell in love with literature. And so it wasn't long after that that I was writing my first poems, and then I was like always writing something, a short story, a poem, something when I was in grade school and in college, and then later on that became the journey into writing essays and things like. There was a long hiatus in between there because I grew up, I had bills. I kind of thought I'm not a published writer by the age of 25, so I must not be good at this. I must have failed, which is a crazy thought. 25 is a baby. And so, but I put it away, and then in 2018, my climate grief made me become a writer again. And so, yeah, that's the story of me as a storyteller in a nutshell. But yeah, I know you said that you also consider yourself a storyteller. I think that really is the role of an artist, is to tell stories and to communicate in that way. What is your environmentalist origin story? How did that become a part of it?
So it's so funny. I have such a hard time. I have to talk myself into answers to these questions,
Oh, we all do. I tell a different answer almost every time.
So, right? Because there are like a million different answers, and you remember, which is why it's cool to come to these, because we say different things all the time. I think a major thing, I've always been, I've been obsessed with animals. Animals and nature, like my whole life, since birth. And I feel like when I was a kid, and maybe still now, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said a black jaguar, because I thought if I tried hard enough, I could turn into a jaguar. Like
how long did you keep that fantasy?
Oh, I still think so. I haven't tried hard enough yet. So like I never really, there wasn't like I want to be a fireman or I want to be an artist. I grew up, it's weird, I know. So I spent my childhood pretending to be animals, telling stories as animals. I did. I insisted on wearing animal costumes all the time. If I had to wear a uniform to school, I went to Catholic school. But if I didn't have to wear the uniform to school, I would have dressed like an animal. I think I still do it now sometimes. I'm not.
You got a bird shirt. So.
Yeah, I do. I have an animal. I'm not a furry. Just to get that out of the way. But if you know what that is, if you don't worry about it. Don't Google it. But yeah, I think it started there with this. I felt, I guess I sort of felt more of an affinity for animals than I did for other non-human animals than I did for other human animals. I felt like they got me. I was quiet, I was shy, but I could look at an animal and we sort of understood each other. And I feel like that's kind of where it started. And I remember where I grew up, there wasn't very much, because back then down south, well, we're more southerly than I grew up, but there wasn't much built up in the area yet. And so there were a lot of vacant lots with just trees in them and stuff. And I remember the day that somebody bought one of the lots and they clear cut it. And I cried for weeks because I was like, where'd the animals go? What are they going to do? And I think like that was the start of me like recognizing that how humans can affect the environment around us. And that I feel like was where I started. But I also was always, I was always making believe. And that's how, I'm also a performer and actor, so I feel like that's why I feel more comfortable making believe than I do. And then that led me into other things. I'm also a master naturalist, a Florida master naturalist, so I now get to tell the animal stories. And that's one of the things that drives me too. There's an art to that as well, to telling those stories. So I use that in my visual artwork, my physical visual artwork, but I also try and be the voice of the animals when I talk about them. So that's kind of where I started.
Yeah, and how does it fuel your process now, that relationship to nature?
This is a good question. I still feel more comfortable around animals than I do around people. And
all of them?
No. But I find a comfort in nature, and I think a lot of us, most people do, like find a comfort in nature. And don't know. I think it's almost grief, the climate grief, the environmental grief that you're talking about, that fuels me. Because, and sometimes I feel really hopeless about it, because I feel like, what am I doing? I'm making a piece of art, and who cares? Like, who's going to see this? Or am I preaching to the choir? But just that, I think wanting to share, wanting to communicate with people what I see and what I feel, and that beauty that I see and that I feel, or the danger of what we're losing, you know, like, because some of my work is depressing, and a lot of it's depressing. But I don't want to, you know, you don't want to be all gloom and doom. There is hope, but I feel like a lot of times, especially around in Florida, like, people aren't seeing it, they're not listening, and so I guess that's what fuels me, that, like, drive to say, look, you know.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I find it, I guess New Orleans is a different animal, right? Because of Katrina hangs so heavily over everybody that it doesn't quite feel like nobody's listening about climate change. It just sort of feels like people think that they're on an island and nobody's ever going to care about them. But that's interesting to hear that Florida is a different story.
Yeah, I feel like here, like, we get the hurricanes, and we still continue to do things that don't make sense. You know, we get.
Oh no, we do things that don't make sense.
But
right? Like Landry is our governor.
right. Well, don't even talk about our governor.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I just feel like so many. There's just I don't understand the denial. I don't understand the denial that people are living in right now, still building right on the beach and being like, we're going to be fine. You know.
Is it denial though, or is it just cruelty?
Because
I'm not sure that these people who we believe are in denial are
actually in denial. That's like the nice way of putting it, right?
So when we were talking before, I mean, we'll get to troubled waters, but to write this book, I had to do a lot of research about school desegregation in the 1950s. And there was this idea that, it was a lot of both siderism when people covered it in the news, right? There was a lot of like, the segregationists say such and such, the black people say this, let's see let's just let them fight. Or, we'll just suppress black people's voices and write the segregationist view and the moderate view. And I see a lot of that, a lot of parallels with that, with the way that we talk about climate change, right? And so there was this idea that a lot of the segregationists weren't really racist, they just wanted to wait. They wanted to do things slowly, they wanted to do things in increments, et cetera, et cetera. That was never true. They just didn't want to do it. And so the closer you got to making them do it, you start to see more and more violence. And that's what I see with climate change as well, right? Like these people are like, well, let's not get carried away with all getting off of fossil fuels. Let's not rush. Let's not disintegrate society for the sake of getting off of fossil fuels. But then as it becomes more and more apparent that this is what we have to do, they get more and more violent, more and more crazy, more and more extractive. And so it's the same sort of playbook over and over again. And this is why I wanted to write this book and put these things into conversation. I mean, there were many reasons why I wrote it, but one of them was that I think that the climate change movement seems to think that it is the first movement to ever take on a big systemic force, the first movement to ever fight for its life, and therefore is constantly reinventing the wheel and not learning from movements that came before it and missing out on key lessons, right? Like this idea that it used to be common knowledge or common wisdom that eventually climate deniers will come along once climate change becomes so apparent you can't deny it anymore. That's not true. They're going to dig their heels in as far as they ever can. And what we also need to deal with is that some of these climate deniers actually want climate change because then resources become fewer and they are able to actually, enact race wars that people have actually wanted for decades, centuries really. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that too, because I was just talking about this and how this moderate approach is absurd at this point. Like this like, oh, we have to talk them into it, we have to ease them into it. And I see the parallel there. Like there is no it's too late. It's too late. You can't ease anybody into anything anymore. You got to like stand up for what you're standing up for. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But so we're talking about the book, and I want to jump ahead because well, I was thinking, well, before we talk about that, I would love to hear like a little bit about like for you to tell everybody about the book.
Sure.
But I wondered like, because I was just talking about this, how do you like nature fuels your process as well, but how do you keep the light in the dark?
A lot of times I don't. Sometimes you need to learn how to see in the dark.
That's good.
So I think, there's always an assumption that if you work in climate change, you must have hope, right? Like a lot of the time I get this question of what gives you hope, and people are very disappointed with my answer because it's almost always nothing. I don't, and that doesn't necessarily mean I'm hopeless. It just means that hope is not something that I focus on. And that, yeah, sometimes I actually am hopeless, but the point of it is like you don't necessarily do it because you think you're going to win. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And so I do a lot of where do I get my motivation, I think is what people are often asking me. And the motivation for me, more than anything, comes out of a debt to repay to previous generations than it does as, a debt to following generations. Like I do care about following generations, even though I don't have children. But I care even more about the price that was paid for my ticket to exist the way that I did. And, the school desegregation narrative in the book, and there's so much more that I'm learning about my grandfather and his civil rights activism. And the idea that he would have done that and sacrificed as much as he did for me to live in a world on fire is unacceptable to me. So that is my motivation. I guess it's a light in the dark, but it's like, a fire. It's a fire. No,
it's more
of a fire than anything.
It's the fire under you that keeps you going.
Yeah.
You need something. I feel like you need, not necessarily hope, because hope can be very Pollyanna-ish, but like definitely like that fire that fuels you. And I feel like also, I love that you said like it's because of what people worked for in the past that you can't give this up, because so often we say it's the future's responsibility. It's the kids. The kids are going to save us, right? But that's why are we putting it on them? Like why can't we stand up for it? So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the book. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I would love for you to also talk about your aunt if you want to.
Of course we do.
Yeah. So tell us a little about the book.
Yeah, so the book is, the simplest way that I've been able to describe it is that it's about the climate change generation and the civil rights generation and the things that go unsaid between them. And quite often the thing that goes unsaid between them, I believe, is gratitude. And often that goes unsaid because you can't say thank you for something you don't understand. And so I wanted to explore that a bit. And so the longer way of describing the book is that my main character, Corinne, is a 20-year-old college student. She has just lost her brother, who was working on an oil boat. Corinne was already an environmentalist. She was already doing environmental activism. She was already an environmental studies major in college. But it's when her brother dies that she becomes radicalized and starts to realize, oh, it's the oil industry. And she decides that she can no longer do mainstream environmental activism, which is like, save the polar bears, save the trees. Like that doesn't match the stakes of the moment for her. So she wants to do something riskier. And that kind of wakes up family ghosts that she doesn't know a whole lot about, and peels back some scars for her grandmother who raised her, who was a child who desegregated the schools in Nashville, Tennessee. Why Nashville, Tennessee? Nashville was actually the first elementary school to desegregate under Brown versus Board of Education. It's often forgotten because at the exact same year that happened, Little Rock desegregated, and Little Rock was extraordinarily violent, largely because the Arkansas governor did not care about optics. He would call in the National Guard. He would do the whole thing. Like he was the one who called in the National Guard to keep the students out of school. The previous year in Clinton, Tennessee, the very first school to desegregate, under Brown versus Board of Education desegregated, and the National Guard was called in to protect the students. But it was the big story until Little Rock, and then everybody forgot about both Clinton, Tennessee, and Nashville. Anyhow, back to Nashville. My Aunt Jackie was one of those children who desegregated the schools in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was incredibly traumatic for her. And it was a story that would like sort of bubble up throughout the family. But it was a story that if I asked more questions about it, I would get like smacked down. It was very clearly touching a nerve to ask about. It was something that they wanted me to know, but didn't want to tell me and didn't want me to ask about, but also wanted me to write about. And it was just, it was a story they didn't want to die, but it was too painful to tell. And so to learn it, I had to do a great deal of internet research, library research, go to the Tennessee archives. I went back to the old house that they used to live in. I went to the school that she desegregated. And I did all of that last summer. And I'm really, really glad that I did, because I got to share all of that with my mother and with my aunt, and be able to give them some closure and fill in some of their hazy memories that they had tried to forget and were now trying to recover, and to fill in some of those conversations they wish they had had with their parents before their parents passed away. And I'm really glad that I did that when I did, because just this past Sunday, my Aunt Jackie passed away. So yeah, I'm glad that I was able to bring her that closure before she passed. I'm glad that she was able to see this book come out into the world before she passed away. But yeah, that is still a very raw thing, and this is the second talk I'm doing since she passed. But it feels important to keep talking about this book and keep talking about this story, because she was just so heartbroken that she felt like she had been erased from history, and I told her I was going to write her back in.
And you did.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it's a great story. I love the parallel, and I love the relationship between Cora and Corinne. So Cora is Corinne's grandmother.
Yeah.
And it, just like you're saying, it's touching. So she was sort of your Aunt Jackie, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's touching a nerve for her in the book to talk about that, because she desegregated the school. Mm-hmm. And so it's so fascinating in the book to hear how love works in that situation, because Cora loves her granddaughter so much, but there are those things that you can't touch, and it creates this great and horrible like push-pull of a relationship in there. But one of the things that really connects them is food and cooking, right? Yeah. So why was it important for you to include that? Because I feel like it's almost a rite of passage for them together. So.
Yeah. I think that is kind of like it's a little bit of a metaphor for what's going on in their relationship. So food and cooking have always been sort of like the love language between Cora and Corinne. And the thing to know about the two of them is that they love each other very deeply, but they're at the point of the book, they are learning how to do that all over again. And one of the ways that shows up in the cooking is that Corinne has gone off to college and she has come back vegan.
like we all,
right. All of us. And it like sends Cora into a panic, because she's like, I don't know how to tell you I love you anymore. And Corinne is also trying to find ways to like compromise on that for her grandmother in ways that still feel true to her. So she still cooks with her grandmother, because we all say that my mother, my grandmother, she shows love by feeding you. Cora also shows you love by teaching you how to cook, and that is like the two of them cook simpatico together. They can anticipate one another's movements, and it's like a ballet when they cook together. It's like, and that was modeled on my grandmother's sisters. When they cooked together, it was like a really beautiful thing to see, and they were amazing cooks. Amazing cooks. My Aunt Jackie, honestly, not quite so much. But her aunts were amazing cooks. And so what they are Cora is learning how to veganize certain things, learning what tofu is, and Corinne is like, well, I guess I could cheat a little bit because Grandmama poured so much into this, and so they're learning how to say I love you and how to accept love from one another in a different way, which is, their relationship is largely strained because they are mourning in very different and conflicting ways over the loss of Cameron, Corinne's brother, and so the food thing becomes a parallel for that part of their relationship too. But yeah, I think food is just such a big part of culture and of family that I wanted to explore that. And it was also, I'm a vegan, spoiler. And so it was kind of fun to write about these foods as though I were eating them again. Like, it was kind of fun to explore things that I remember cooking. It was like going down memory lane in my own head. But yeah, I also know that you use food and cooking a lot in your art. So can you talk a little bit more about how you use it?
I do, and it's interesting because you like this one piece that I just did is what comes to mind, and it's sort of the opposite. Like you're using it to show love, and so often food is used to show love. And in this particular piece that I just did, I used food to show like force feeding. Mm-hmm. So I went in the opposite direction. It's kind of opposite. It was my piece addressed bodily autonomy, and I baked bread, which is a beautiful ritual. And I took that and I think to watch somebody bake bread is like when you punch down the dough, it's such a really beautiful ritual, and the smell is so good. And I took that idea and kind of turned it on its head because I was feeling a lot of feelings about what's going on right now in the world, and so my version of it was the opposite, to show like what happens when you're force fed, mm-hmm. when you have no choice, mm-hmm. And it's just a glut, constant. So it's really interesting, but I do love how they're like Cora and Corinne, that coming together of the vegan and the meat eater mm-hmm. is sort of parallel. Like they're like, I'll give a little here, I'll give a little there, without and that's what they're doing mm-hmm. in every part of their relationship. Sort of giving a little, so that they can find that mm-hmm. that connection. I love that.
Yeah.
Let's see, we got some more questions. I can't memorize stuff anymore. Yes, right. So the Mississippi River flood of mm-hmm. 1927. This is like a character in your book, and I would love for you to talk about that, because I think a lot of people. Has anybody here heard of the Mississippi River flood
of 1927? There have been many.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. So I would love, because this is the river. The river is like such a presence in the book. So it's she loves it. Mm-hmm. It's a nightmare. Talk a little bit about that.
Has anybody here ever seen the Mississippi River? Yeah. Okay, so it's huge. And if you've grown up in the river region of Mississippi or Louisiana, it's going to be a big influence on you, because it's just so huge and majestic. And if nothing else, you're going to respect it. And I think for Corinne, having grown up in Port Gibson, Mississippi, which is it sounds like it would be on the coast, but it's not. It's on the river. And that's also, that's where my mom lives now. It's where I grew up for half my childhood. And all of life is, even to this day, kind of shaped by the Mississippi River. There's so much commerce that goes up and down it, including the oil boat that her brother dies on. It goes up and down the Mississippi River. The river is also, at that time that the book is set in 2013 and 2014. At that time, it was the height of oil boats going up and down the river, because so many pipelines were held up in court. And that was the only way to get the oil from way up north to way down south. And so the river is such a big character, because if you've grown up there, it's just going to feel like a character to you. That's just a very natural thing. And the 1927 Mississippi River flood was the biggest disaster in United States history until Hurricane Katrina. It also, another big parallel to Katrina is that it was another time, and I believe it might have been the first and only time other than Katrina, that U.S. citizens were referred to as refugees.
So that's kind of her climate origin story. That's her environmentalist origin story.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it's a climate origin story. I think she was already an environmentalist, you know, with a small e before that. But I think that was the moment where she realized that there are some people who tamper with nature in a way that is incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
And that some people are hurting nature, I guess is the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the first time she realized there's a problem, there's a conflict.
Yeah. And it's caused by people, like that people don't care.
Very specific people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it affects very specific people, you know, on the worst side.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let me see. I know, I'm such a dork. I should have like...
Oh, that's okay.
What do you want to jump to? Do you want to, I love that we just talked about that. Do you want to, because I would love to let people ask questions too before we finish. What do you hope, so we were talking about like hope or not hope, or, you know, like sometimes you don't feel hope at all. Do you have a hope of what people feel when they finish this book? Do you hope that it, I'm not even going to put words in your mouth. What do you hope happens when people read this book?
Well, I hope that the message that I would like people to take away from it is that it is still possible to heal on a burning planet, and it's still possible to put yourself back together even when the world is falling apart. And that is worthy. I think so often we feel like there's so many things to fix in the world that fixing ourselves is selfish. But I actually think fixing ourselves is necessary, because I don't think that broken people fix things. So also, before we open up for everybody, I wanted you to talk about, what do you think the role of the artist is in the climate crisis?
Like I was saying before, I feel like, you know, a lot of times the role of the artist is to, this is like such a Shakespearean thing to say, to hold the mirror up to nature. You know what I mean? Like to show people what's going on in a way that maybe they're not ready to confront. And sometimes you have to sneak that in too. You know, sometimes with art you can be sneaky because you know, somebody might not quite know what they're looking at until they really look at it. But yeah, I feel like it's my, I don't know, job. It's my, I don't know, I don't have a good word for it.
Calling?
My curse to want to, like, you know, like we were saying at the very beginning, being a storyteller is wanting so badly to communicate with people and to sort of have communion with people, to connect. And so like my calling or whatever, like I want to connect with people, and I want to connect with them in a way that makes them see what I see and see the beauty and the horror, and in some way that we can come together and sort of heal, like you're saying, like because that's the only way, if we can all, I mean, this is very like but like, you know, there's got to be a way for us to come to some sort of consensus and heal together, or we're not going to move forward. And so I feel like that's sort of my, even in the depressing stuff, even in the bad stuff, even in the, bad is the wrong word, even in the, like, you know, the stuff that's deals with the negative aspects of it, I hope that somebody picks that up and says like we can do something about this, or I feel you, I connect with you. Sorry, I'm hitting my microphone again. I'm gonna cut it. It's so soft. And that's what I hope for, that connection, and that somehow art brings people together in that way. You know, and I think the worst thing is for you to see art and feel nothing. Right? Like, I would rather have you go, oh, I hate that, and have a reaction, because then you're having a reaction, and that means something. A reaction means something. So then just feel nothing. I think that's important.
Yeah. I do not want people to look at my book and say, I hate that.
No, I mean, I don't want it.
We're different types of artists. I don't know.
But it's funny, because like when you like art, like not everybody's gonna like your art, and so but like I don't want
that. Yeah.
Like I don't want some, but you do want everybody to like it. Yeah. But yeah, for me, like I don't always mind if somebody doesn't like it. I don't always mind if they don't like it. but people have a reaction to it, and that's what it is. Because you can not like it and still have the right reaction to it. Do you know what I mean? You know, you can be like, that is frightening, and but that's the reaction, is that is frightening, and maybe that makes me think about something in that way. So in that way, I like, you know, it's kind of positive to me. But I also don't want people to hate my work. Anyway, do we want to ask, does anyone have any questions? I would love to field questions about the book or anything.
About life.
About life, you know, like, what's your climate journey? What's your origin story?
It sounds like you both, you know, you're talking about what prompted you to do what you do. And I think the term compulsion, you're compelled to do it.
Yeah.
It's stronger than just, you know, you remember what it was like to see stories, hear stories. The first stories that you heard as a child impacted you, it hit you in such a way, such a profound way, that you were compelled to become storytellers of one sort or the other. So it's a really, really powerful response to life. It's your life force. You know? You don't do what you do because, I'm sorry, Autumn is my partner. You don't do what you do because you want to or you like to.
No, I don't always like to. Yeah.
You have to do it. You know?
It's unfortunate.
And yeah, it can be unhappy making, but it's also the power of the artist. All good artists have to do what they do.
Well, and I love that Mary comes from this just line of storytellers too, and is that it's, you know, that you're compelled by that to tell stories, to continue that lineage of storytelling because it was so important to you. I think that's beautiful.
Mary, your family sounds filmic.
Filmic?
Film. I mean, it sounds like there's a film in the way your family got together. And forgive me, I haven't read the book yet. I will because Autumn has a copy. So I'm not. I can't speak to whether the book. From what I hear of the book, it sounds like there's a film there also. But also your family experience and these wonderful characters and your relations. Sounds film-worthy, like putting a film together.
Get on that, Steve.
Yeah, no, they would hate that. They are fictionalized for a reason.
I guess on that note, I've known you both for a while, and I know that like you have your solo, you have your book, but I imagine that you have other projects already going out. So do you guys, do you ladies, can you share a little bit of, are you working on a specific project that you can share that you're working on?
Okay. No, you first.
Oh, Jesus. Damn it.
Dibs.
I'm always working on something. Right now, the show that I have has the solo show. A lot of times when I do a group of a body of work, I guess you could call it, to be all like, it starts with writing, with a poem usually. And so this piece has 2 poems that are in the gallery, and I'm working on a longer collection of those poems right now. And then what do I have? Oh, I'm also a performer. And I'm working with the Norton Museum of Art up in West Palm to create, they have a gorgeous, if you're ever up that way, right now Rose B. Simpson has an exhibition there, and it's incredible. She's a ceramicist that comes, speaking of storytelling, I know this is a little off the subject, but she comes from 70 generations matrilineally of ceramics artists. She lives near Espanola in New Mexico, and And her work is amazing. And in the exhibition, they actually have her mother and her grandmother's work. It's the first time they've exhibited them together. And we're just creating a little devised kind of performance piece around some of her work at the museum. So I'm working on that with a couple of other artists. But if you ever get up that way, or if you even just want to Google Rose B. Simpson, she's so incredible. So that's what I'm working on.
Yeah.
Europe.
So I have the podcast that you mentioned earlier. The latest episode actually is about some of the research that I wasn't able to fit into here because the story of school desegregation is told from the perspective of a child here, so there's a lot of context and stuff that she wouldn't know. It also ties in how climate change and school desegregation tie together directly. There are more indirect ties other than it happening in the same family. And so go listen to that. This sold in a 2-book deal, so I am contractually obligated to write a second novel. Do not ask me if I've started on it. And I also am working on an all-Black climate essay collection with Pantheon, which I don't know if you're really into publishing news, but there's been a big shakeup there, so who knows what's going to happen with that. So that's what I've got going on for now.
Awesome.
Thank you.
A question in the back. 2.
I like the generational piece that you bring into your work, and like when you were explaining the book, I've been thinking about like you brought up a great point about how oftentimes movements think that they have to reinvent the wheel or not look back.
Yeah.
And I think, as people, we do, like, sometimes the past does come back up, and it's like this continuum, and I think the interest is time. But when you said that when you talk about the second book, like what was ringing in my ear, I was just thinking about, like, I know that you said that you haven't started thinking about it yet.
Oh, no, I've started thinking about it. I just ain't started writing it.
But, like, what popped in my head was more so there's been so many movements around this country specifically, around, civil rights and, like, different things, and I just think I went back to, like, my younger years of reading, like, the books, what was it, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry.
Oh my God, I love that book.
Like those type of series.
It's my favorite book as a kid. Oh my God. It takes place right by where I grew up.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
So, like, I guess for me, I was hearing, like, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, like, franchises and, like, more so, like, the series within this story of, like, tying in, like, the different movements that has happened and, like, the main character, like, tying in climate change to, like, these different aspects. And, like, I'm personally interested in, like, the intersectionality of, like, work and, like, movements now. So I was thinking about that. I just wanted to put that, like, in the space as you were thinking about, like, the next book.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm pretty satisfied with where I leave this family at the end of this book. So I don't think it's going to be a sequel. And it does touch on the early part of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So a little bit of a spoiler is that it ends shortly before Baltimore and Ferguson erupt in Black Lives Matter protests, but after Eric Garner is murdered. So it does tie in some of that and, like, sees how these characters would interact with that. But yeah, I think I probably for the next book I will stay with environmental and Black themes, like Black environmentalist themes, in the next book. But I don't think that Black environmentalism is as overly intellectual and technical as a lot of people expect environmentalism to be. So it may not look that way to some folks, right? But it will be about Black people's relationship with the earth, for sure. Yeah. Sasha?
What I was going to talk about is less a question and more of a comment. So earlier you mentioned that like your art is supposed to have like a reaction, and what it brought up for me was, I'm not going to give a spoiler, but yes, I've read the book.
She moderated my talk in Coral Gables on Tuesday.
You're a cheater.
Yeah.
I was going to read it regardless. But the action that Corinne did, one of the things that she said, I'm not going to say the action, but one of the things that she talked about was, I want to make sure that it has a response for the people who are seeing and witnessing action. And I think a lot of times, as an aspiring author myself, as like a small independent publisher, sometimes when you create a work, you're always wondering, okay, well, who's the audience? Like, who does this actually impact? How does this really make a change? And so I would hope that that reaction, it sparks even a question or a comment that turns into an action. And I think that's part of when, like when I read the book, I'm not necessarily saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna get up and go do something, but that there are thoughts that then turn into some type of mobilization or movement for myself, or a realization about how I'm connected to the story of desegregation or not, or how I'm connected to climate change, or how am I connected to the earth. So that those series of like see art, have a reaction, then an action, even if it's like a very subtle action, a change in the way you ask yourself questions, or a change in the way that you make a movement towards something, or a change in the way you see connections between issues that weren't necessarily there before. And I think that that's really the part of the beauty of this book, is like the intersectional piece, because Mary knows this, but like the Eric Gardner piece, like really, really spoke to me very strongly, because you have like an honoring and an offering of a time that sometimes not necessarily captured. So even to read like I Can't Breathe, like we wore that on shirts, like we wore that very strongly during a time period, but you're marking it down for history, right? And again, like historical fiction, you continue to chart those pathways for people to think about that moment in time, what it meant, and again, reaction, action, so changes. So just thank you.
Thank you.
So when is the book of short stories that your grandfather told coming out? I kind of want to know about the chicken in the head. I'm just saying.
Well, I will say a lot of stories are sprinkled throughout here. So I mentioned earlier the story of the time the chicken got stuck on Aunt Jackie's head, right? So one thing I learned in writing this is, so my cousins in Birmingham, my aunts in Birmingham, make fun of Aunt Jackie because the reason the chicken got on her head was because she was messing with the babies. And she was like, they're so cute, I want to pick them up. And they were like, don't do that, the chicken's right there, right? And they make fun of her because like, why would you do that? That's stupid. Like, obviously the chicken's going to stick on your head. So one of the things I learned in doing this research was that my grandfather used to work at the post office. In the 50s, people would ship baby chickens in the mail. And sometimes people didn't come and pick them up. So he would bring them home for his children to play with. So Aunt Jackie was used to playing with baby chickens without a big chicken around. And so when she sees them in Birmingham, it doesn't occur to her that there's a mama chicken that's going to start sand on her head. So yeah, I'm learning all this stuff about school desegregation, but now that story starts to make more sense outside of like just picturing little Aunt Jackie with a chicken on her head, which is hysterical because she's like running around trying to get off the chicken. They had to like call Aunt Ma to get it off her head. But now it makes more sense why she would do that. But I don't know if I'm going to do a short story collection with my grandfather, but that piece about him bringing biddies back from the post office, I worked that into this story. Yeah.
You sound like my Aunt Judy.
Oh really? Did she mess with baby chickens?
No, she's a lefty, for instance, and something happened. She goes, well, it's because I was born with a left hand. I'm like, okay.
Oh,
Just very like.
weren't we all?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty.
Exactly. Just in her own little
That's Judy.
planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that exactly. She's
Yeah.
just in her own little. I mean, we love and adore her, and she just makes us laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jackie didn't like that story. Yeah.
Great. Any more questions? Okay.
Just one more comment that really resonated when you talked about, for me, when you talked about activism to help our planet, not so much for the future, but to honor those who came before us really resonated. My parents didn't raise me to trash this planet. And it's a dishonor to them if I were to do that sort of thing, if I weren't to do what I can to, in my small way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you so much for Mary to join us.
Thank you.